So let's talk about one really quite specific Space Marine army list that appears to have become the dominant competitive way to play Space Marines, at least from the core codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it might be interesting to take a look at one very big trend in Space Marine army lists on the tournament scene, and do a bit of dissecting on the Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead that does seem to have a surprising amount of people playing it, and achieving far better results now than the Gladius or Ironstorm. It has been kind of interesting to watch over the last few months or so as people have started to figure out Codex Space Marines, and I feel like most of the time when you get new codexes come out, the absolute top combos are at least fairly obvious already. Most people jump on them really quite quickly in the first few weekends of tournaments, and then while people come out with different versions of the same thing, I don't feel like it's all that often that people find a different build, and then realise that perhaps the optimal way to play the army is really quite different to what they first suspected. The Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead, I think, seemed to get most wide attention when it was used by John Lennon of Art of War to come second in the Warhammer World Championships, a really quite massive and prestigious event given that it was being popularised by Games Workshop and there were lots of big names in attendance. I'm sure there'll have been plenty of people playing it beforehand, but certainly since then it's maybe been a bit more in the eye of people taking things to tournaments, and lots of other people have played similar sort of lists with all sorts of different variants, but generally doing really quite well with it on the tournament scene. Just for a sense of how much this has been an uptick, I thought I'd look at StatCheck 40k's Warhammer 40k website, which I thoroughly recommend for looking at what sort of detachments armies are playing. But it seems that for the first 6 weeks after Codex Space Marines dropped, Gladius Task Force and Ironstorm Spearhead were by far the most played Space Marine detachments, and people certainly were winning some big tournaments with those or placing high. Vanguard Spearhead was in a somewhat dismal 4th place behind those two, sitting at around a 48% win rate, not really looking particularly standout, though some people were using it in one form or another. Then though, if you look at the most recent 4 weeks worth of tournament data, that seems to have been entirely flipped around. Vanguard Task Force is now the most played tournament detachment for Space Marines at a grand tournament kind of level, and rather than having a win rate of around about 48%, it's now almost 60%. It seems that adding the Ultramarines into the detachment was the secret sauce to allow it to do really well. Here's that runner-up list at the World Championships by John Lennon that I did mention on the channel at the time. An Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead with Marnius Calgar Uriel Ventris and an Apothecary Biologist with the Blade Driven Deep, a big unit of Aggressors and Centurion Devastators, some Company Heroes, then a whole ton of Eradicators, Inceptors and Scouts, and an allied Calidus Assassin. Overall an absolute ton of danger here, and lots of things that have crafty movement tricks for getting places on the board that they shouldn't be. Seems like a list that can absolutely threaten the damage to wipe out enemies while also scoring high. The main reason that people take the Ultramarines for the list though is 2 big combos that you run with it. The first one is infiltrating Calgar into the midfield. Marnius Calgar's a pretty efficient datasheet in its own right, 185 points for a very punchy chapter master with twin linked strength 8 and damage 3. He farms up a command point every turn, which is really quite handy and can allow you to use more of the excellent Vanguard Spearhead stratagems that we'll get onto. And beyond that, he comes with 2 Attendant Victrix Honor Guards, which when added together have really quite a lot of melee threat and good durability, and he basically gets all the Gladius style combat doctrines in one: Advance and Charge, Fall Back, Shoot and Charge, and Advance and Shoot. He's typically added into a unit of Aggressors that often form the basis of big damage combos for the Space Marines, these guys. Lots of twin links damage 1 attacks, with their ranged firepower that should certainly be able to melt hordes, and then big hitting melee when they charge in. They'll quite enjoy having those Victrix Honor Guards seeded within the unit as well, as they can potentially try and tank for the units, deflecting high AP shots on their Storm Shields, or even low AP ones on their 2+ save. Then also attaching to the units to make it a mighty 10-man squad is the Apothecary Biologist at 55 points. He adds a little bit to the objective control, but he mainly gives lethal hits, making the unit a lot more dangerous against tough stuff. Not bad when most of their attacks are mid-strength, even if they're twin-linked. Putting that all together, and it gets you a squad that's almost 500 points worth of investment, massively threatening and very tanky for any individual enemy units to try and take out. And then the enhancement Blade Driven Deep allows the entire unit to infiltrate, so you could start this all in the midboard, and that's pretty nasty on a unit that's got really quite a big advance and charge type threat with Calgar in it. They absolutely could be making first turn charges, and perhaps pulverising something with that massive amount of bolt storm shots before they do. Any stratagem targeted on these guys will generally have immense value as well, seeing as you're affecting really quite a large part of the army there, and it just gives you an absolutely enormous threat for the enemy to try and deal with, which could be harder than usual given the Vanguard stratagems. In particular, these guys could be quite good for the 1 command point calculated feint one, which means that if the enemy tries to charge them, they could backpedal d6 inches, might make them a lot harder to get to grips with unless they can get right up close. Or all that bolt storm fire could be kind of strong with strike from the shadows. If they shoot at something that's greater than 12 inches away, they could get +1 to hit and an extra AP, which is really going to make all of those twin-linked bolters shred things pretty well. Even just Armour of Contempt on them would add a whole load of durability as well, particularly if it's layered on top of either cover or the core buff from the Vanguard task force of getting stealth and cover at greater than 12 inches. Then the other really big combo that the Ultramarines bring to the Vanguard are the Centurion Devastator squads teleporting around. These guys I'd argue are a kind of okay unit that gets really good in Vanguard Spearhead. 175 points for 3 of them, or 350 for the big 6, and again I guess it's probably going to be the 6 of them in this detachment. The only loadout I've ever seen anyone take for these guys is with the twin las cannons and the missile launchers. The las cannons give you really quite efficient anti-tank, re-rolling hit rolls of 1 innately, or everything against an objective. That should be 3 shots with re-roll all hits and wounds if they can draw a bead on that kind of target, and the missile launchers are actually really quite general purpose. For a unit of 3 to be 3d3, strength 9, AP 2 and damage d3 shots with blast, they're really quite good for destroying elite infantry. Their main issue under normal circumstances is that they just really don't move all that far. Only moving 4 inches per turn means they're almost immobile firepower in most Space Marine formations, plus their defense maybe isn't that exciting, at least compared with big tanky vehicles and dreadnoughts. Here to help them out though is Uriel Ventris for 75 points. He can't actually join the Centurion unit, but what he can do is provide deep strike to a unit, and that unit can be any infantry unit and doesn't have to be the one that he actually has to join himself. It means that you could have Centurions essentially hiding in reserve and pop up with good line of sight. Beyond that, he just allows you to double up on a stratagem if you absolutely need to, though you still need to spend the CP for it, so it's not really that great. It's just a kind of fighty captain with a bunch of strength 6 attacks with sustained hits. Putting those two together, though, means that in Vanguard Spearhead, the big unit of 6 Centurion Devastators gets enormously scary. Just from the core Vanguard Spearhead rule, they get Shadow Masters, which means that at greater than 12-inch range, they're -1 to hit and get the benefit of cover. That's really quite nice on the Centurion armour to make that a lot tankier. That means that even if they were in a position where they couldn't get cover, it still means that they might get the AP debuff even if they're out in the open sometimes, and that could combine really nicely with Armour of Contempt. You could be saving AP -3 on a 3+. The big bit that Uriel Ventris adds though is by giving them the Deep Strike keyword, they make amazing use of the Guerrilla Tactics stratagem. That's one that allows you to return 2 strategic reserves for an infantry unit, either just 1 of any infantry unit or 2 scout or phobos units, but it's easily enough value when applies to one massive 350 point squad like this. It means that at the end of the enemy turn you can decide whether your Centurion squad is in the right place. If it is able to get good line of sight on something that it can destroy, then you're just able to keep it on the board. If your opponent's hidden something key from it, then you could put it back into Deep Strike Reserve, have it turn up next turn. And because of the way that Deep Strike and Strategic Reserve combine as per the core rules, it means they can set up anywhere on the table and just delete something important that the enemy really wanted to keep safe. They do get those full hit re-rolls against units on objectives, but if you really wanted to take their damage even further, you could also use the Strike from the Shadows battle tactic for them. I feel like with their good range, they're often going to be shooting against something that's greater than 12 inches away, and getting them +1 to hit and extra AP could be really quite big. Otherwise in these lists, the company heroes seem to be at least fairly commonly taken, basically 4 tanky guys for 95 points with OC2 and some OK threat. They pair really quite well with Uriel Ventris, as a good part of his value is in giving the deep strike to the Centurions, so beyond then you just need to make the best use of his combat profile, and he'll do okay with these. Seems that not everyone chooses to use these though, and sometimes uses other things. Otherwise, Inceptors in heavy numbers seem to be really good with this as well. I feel like Inceptors in Codex Space Marines are rarely a unit that you can really take too many of. The 3-inch Deep Strike is amazing for secondary objectives, and they have genuinely good damage output, and again could potentially be worth using that Strike from the Shadows one for +1 to hit and extra AP in the right circumstances with a big unit. Again, they're another great unit though that could return to reserve as well as the Centurions if that wasn't needed. If you had a big unit of 6 of them jump down and obliterate something, you could take them off the board again and have them jump down again within 3 inches of something else and take out something different. Overall, putting that all together, you get several enormous threats in these army lists. Mine is Calgar plus Aggressors plus the Apothecary Biologist to deal some absolutely massive damage on the front lines and give the opponent something they really can't ignore in the midfield. Then a great big teleporting Centurion unit that's got enough threats to take down most heavy targets the opponent has, and they're not going to be able to hide from it while they jump around in your own backfield. And then on top of that, a whole load of Inceptors striking from the sky, coming down exactly where they want, and lighting isolated enemy elements of the army up with massive damage, with the potential to return to reserves if the enemy doesn't deal with them immediately. Both of those two enormous units could be pretty massive for Overwatch as well. Both the Aggressors and the Centurion Devastators have a ton of threat and could easily be worth 1 CP there. Between all that, it looks like quite a lot of people are having good success with this army list at tournaments. Here's another one by Hank Adams, who used it to take second at the Merry Slashmas tournament, going 6-0 against a really big tournament of 94 players. It is kind of interesting to see the different variants that people take. This one's got a combi weapon lieutenant for some lone operative goodness, and a librarian and Phobos armor with some infiltrators. They're a pretty god tier home objective holder unit. You can't deep strike within 12 inches of them, you can't shoot them at greater than 12 inches of them, and they could threaten that reactive movement stratagem if it made sense to try and get them safe if it made the most sense to. Otherwise, this list goes excessively heavy on the Inceptors, no less than 3 units of 6, 2 with plasma and 1 with assault bolters, a ridiculous amount of pinpoint damage there. And otherwise, there's 2 units of scouts to support, rarely a bad idea in any Space Marine army list, and they can react and move quite well. It looks like the assault intercessors are filling in as Uriel Ventress's bodyguards, a little bit cheaper than the company heroes, and they get that potential reroll or wound roll special rule if they're attacking something on an objective, which would be really quite good with Uriel's attacks and making them more dangerous. Otherwise, for another example, this was a list by James Shapiro, who used it to take first at Incursion Events 40k GT. This one's got the somewhat stock combo, with company heroes for Uriel again this time, and goes for minimum size squads of Inceptors, but still 3 of them, 1 squad with plasma and 2 with assault bolters. This time there's still a unit of infiltrators, again maybe to hold the home field. 2 units are eradicators with multi-melters. Again, they feel like a unit that's quite good in Vanguard Spearhead. Could be interesting coming out of Strategic Reserve maybe, perhaps. 2 units of scouts, a Calidus assassin to jump around doing secondaries, and perhaps the most interesting thing in the army, a Storm Speeder Hammer Strike that has a bit of anti-elite sort of shooting and also strips cover from a target. I guess either the Centurions or the Aggressors might really quite like that depending on their target. Finally, for a 4th example, here's one by Brad Chester, who used this to take 3rd at ITC Winter Assault Major at the Everwinter. Again, this one's got the Phobos Librarian plus Infiltrators for a unit that denies both deep strike and shooting at 12 inches, and the Phobos Librarian this time takes Shadow War Veteran to ruin one enemy battle tactics stratagem and make it increase in command point cost. This one again goes very heavy on the Inceptors, 2 squads of 6 and 1 squad with 3, has 3 units of scouts rather than 2, and interestingly enough has absolutely no bodyguard for Uriel Ventress that I can see. I guess he's just going to be soloing it as a random character who could do some secondary objectives or be a bit of a placeholder type unit, but interestingly enough makes room for even more Centurions, so there's a unit of 6 of them and a unit of 3 of them. That's really quite a lot of las cannon and missile firepower there, and will give you another scary gun turret that could be moving around the board, and you could still potentially redeploy the smaller one with strategic reserve still, I suppose. Overall, certainly seems to be a list that's been shaking up the Space Marine meta a bit. It's not like people aren't using other things, but this exact build does seem to be being run by quite a lot of people out there. It's definitely got some enormous damage output, though I think it's the sort of thing that would make you make some big decisions as to where your big power pieces are going. What are the Centurions going to try and do each turn, and is Marnius Calgar and his unit going to play aggressive or defensive? And the Inceptors always feel like quite big commitments when they get thrown in, particularly big units of 6 of them, where if they don't destroy the thing that they need to, then they might get picked up in short order. Let me know your thoughts on the combos though. Look forward to hearing your ideas or any battlefield tales that you might have had for using any of these. It'll be interesting to see if any part of this might get toned down with a balanced data slate. It seems perhaps prevalent enough that it might attract Games Workshop's attention. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to help support, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.